The Batman is the newest attempt at rebooting The Batman, and this one is helmed entirely by writer-director Matt Reeves. If you're unfamiliar with his work, he was the one responsible for the direction of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, and then he wrote and directed the entirety of War for the Planet of the Apes. He also directed Cloverfield back in 2008, and The Batman, as simply put as possible, if you watch Seven and you watch Watchmen and you just kind of put those two together in the narrative style and the story, you kind of get an amalgamation that results in The Batman. And with that being said, The Batman is just like the Paul Thomas Anderson film Magnolia is a cinephile's dream. The Batman has a runtime of approximately 2 hours and 47 minutes of the film itself. Total runtime, 2 hour 55 minutes. And The Batman is a story based mystery psychological crime thriller through and through. This is not your typical Hollywood shitted out Batman film. Now, it's not saying that this goes through creative, extraordinarily original hoops or anything, but like I said, this is a film for cinephiles. If you've watched Watchmen, the storytelling that Zack Snyder gave was a bunch of voiceovers mixed with slow, somber paced storytelling. And then Seven was the crime thriller with Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman and Kevin Spacey, and that was directed by David Fincher, and that has like a really slow, somber pace. And both of those two films together would, I honest to God would say they would make the amalgamation of the Batman. The Batman stars a whole wide cast of actors between Robert Pattinson, Zoe Kravitz, Colin Farrell, even though you wouldn't even expect to hear his name, but he's in it. You just don't really see him at all. He plays in the film, but you cannot recognize him. That's what I mean. John Turturro, or however his last name is, Jeffrey Wright, among other actors in it. And the Batman, as I said, this is not your typical, this isn't even like a Christopher Nolan type of Dark Knight. The Batman is a standalone. It's on its own, and it actually comes with its own merit. This film is for story and storytelling and plot, and that's it. There's violent action sequences in it, but none of that is actually the main focus of it. If you're going into the Batman just looking for Batman to beat him up all the time, like any other Batman film, this is not the film for you. Think of the storytelling direction of Magnolia and then add in the Batman. And that is what you'll experience for almost 3 hours. This film has a very incredibly slow pace, but that's not bad. Their main focus is the story and kind of just delving all of the details out, giving them to you piece by piece. And then you learn everything about the main premise and the main storyline definitely by the end. And then there's even a final act after all of the revelations and everything. And honestly, throughout, from the beginning to the end, I was just awestruck with how this was filmed. I did not expect this kind of filmmaking from Matt Reeves. Matt Reeves has his own direction style for storytelling. Like I said, Dawn and War for the Planet of the Apes was more so getting involved with the characters, and that's what he does in the Batman. But there's also always like a vibrant, exciting tone in those films. The Batman, it's not a drag by any means. It's just the Batman is really focused on getting you invested in this world, getting you invested in the characters, everything that it's trying to portray. And my personal opinion, it does a remarkable job with bringing you and taking you into this newly developed world. Sure, we know everything about Gotham nowadays, but the thing is, this is its own standalone original story. This is year 2 of Batman, and the main story's main villain centers around the Riddler, and this is actually a more mature, adulty kind of villain. This isn't the Jim Carrey Riddler we got like 25 years ago. This Riddler has a scheme throughout the entire film that actually boils up into a very big revelation that makes a ton of sense from character to character. And then outside of the story, the character to character interactions work very well. This film has some race swapping for characters, but they don't go full on woke or anything. Like, yeah, they recast Commissioner Gordon with a black actor, that being Jeffrey Wright, and Catwoman with Zoe Kravitz. She kind of looks half black, maybe she's full black, I don't know. But in their roles, they do remarkable jobs, and their characters are not just woke pieces of trash written in, just basically saying, well, I'm this black character, so you like me. That's not what their characters do in this film. In this film, every single character has their own motivation, has their own point to be made in this film. There's a reason for every character in this film. As for characters, I would have to say Robert Pattinson as Batman. I liked him as Batman, and I liked the premise around his Batman. I wasn't really fully involved or intrigued in his take on Bruce Wayne. I thought outside of the gear, he kind of just seemed like an emo nerd, a very depressive rich person. But outside of that, I think for the most part, he does a remarkable job as Batman. And like I said, everybody all around does remarkable jobs for the acting and portraying their characters. And the story itself really builds up Gotham as its own giant city, and you are very well involved in this city because of the main story being so involving. And that is due in part to the writing and the direction style and the storytelling and narrative that they place this film within. The scoring of it, if the storytelling weren't the way it actually is in the film, I would say the score is kind of off-putting to the tone, but it does work well because of the editing. You start getting some soundtrack in the film, and then the editing kind of swaps from scene to scene and transitions smoothly and fluently, and it just all works well. Some big hits like Something in the Way by Nirvana, that's probably the biggest hit in the soundtrack, among a newly recreated Batman theme that just kind of is more of a dark aesthetic that's kind of in the background in every dark scene. I don't want to say every scene, but whenever it doesn't cue for a regular song, it does kind of just use their newly recreated Batman theme, and that's fine. It works for whenever they implement it into the scenes. As for the plot, getting back into that, because the Batman is all about the plot and the story. And the plot and the story is literally a psychological mystery crime thriller. A lot of similarities to the likes of Seven or Prisoners. And bringing up Prisoners and Seven, the direction style, I commend Matt Reeves because he's not one of my all-time favorite directors. He's a really good director. One of my all-time favorite directors is Denis Villeneuve, and I feel like he took a lot of cues from him, a lot of cues from Zack Snyder, a lot of cues from David Fincher, all of their direction styles, and he kind of used them and implemented them in his own creative way in telling the story. And I think he does a remarkable job with how he wrote and told this story for the Batman. I give the Batman a lot of praise, a lot more praise than I honestly expected. I knew I would like this film, but I really enjoyed the Batman, although there is some defying logic, and it happens in most superhero, anti-hero, cop films above all. And the problem I have with the Batman is there are scenes where the Batman does get shot a bunch of times, but then there are other scenes where multiple kinds of cops, multiple kinds of villains are trying to shoot him down, and they just have no accuracy whatsoever. But then there are times where they just have a semi-automatic and they just go to town on his chest with the gun and the bullets. It doesn't really add up. One scene they are properly trained, the other scene all of them are improperly trained, which just doesn't make sense, especially when it's a cop scene trying to shoot him. That's mainly the only gripe I have against this. When those scenes happened, I literally was in the middle of the theater and I was just like, well, that's incredibly dumb. I should have expected at least one scene like that. And there are only 2 scenes like that in this almost 3-hour behemoth. So for the most part, I really enjoyed the Batman. Almost 3 hours long, and I would say out of the almost 3 hours, 2 hours and 42 minutes, I really appreciated this film. And the total runtime without the credits is about 2 hours, 47 minutes. Now, to end this review, I must also say, if you look at the MPAA rating, it's PG-13, look closely on the rating of PG-13, and hands down, this film is Warner Bros. Sellout to try and just cash grab and grab back all of the money they lost from all of the DCEU. They have 3 suggested ratings of strong everything, and going into this film with those kind of expectations, the first 10 minutes I already called out this should be rated R, and it should be. Throughout the entire film, there's a lot of dark content in it, strong violent content. I wouldn't say strong violent images. They do kind of hold back from gore, but there is a lot of drug content. There are a lot of mafia, drug kingpins and all of that. There's some semi-strong language. There's one F word, but with it as a strung out 3-hour behemoth of a film, there's going to be a lot of language. So I don't think it's the content specifically in the Batman for all of the strong ratings, as due to the amount, the quantity of all of the content in it. I still believe this should have been rated R, but overall, at least Warner Bros. Did not screw around with this film like they do every single other DC film. So overall for me, The Batman is a very solid 9 out of 10. Thank you.